Small island, big ideas, much more than the beach. Small country, big reach, touching the world virtually. We might be small, but proud people, we standing tall. Creative and hardworking, we bring Barbados to you. If you can't get to Barbados, we get Barbados to you. UNCTAD, Barbados welcomes you.
Greetings and salutations from Barbados. The Honourable Mia Amor Motley, QC MP, Prime Minister of Barbados. Heads of Government, Ms. Rebecca Grinspan, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Ms. Isabel Durant, Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD. Professor the Most Honourable V. Udine Barato, Lead Organizer of the Gender and Development Forum and Professor of Gender and Public Policy at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow Unit. Dr. Mariama Williams, our distinguished keynote speaker. Representatives of the UNCTAD member states. The Civil Society and the Gender, Trade and Development Division of UNCTAD. Our many participants and friends from across the Global South. Members of the Planning and Consultative Committees for the Gender and Development Forum, UNCTAD 15, distinguished guests, welcome to the opening ceremony of the inaugural Gender and Development Forum of the 15th session of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD 15. This has been a long time coming, but finally, we are here. Barbados is the first Caribbean country and the first small island developing state to host a session of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and, might I add, the smallest nation to do so. Since the first quadrennial conference of UNCTAD in 1964, this 15th session is the first time UNCTAD has dedicated a forum to examine issues of gender, trade, and development. With this welcome and overdue introduction, UNCTAD recognizes that according to Barker 2006, quote, from its inception, economic development has affected women and men differently, end quote. Nowhere is that difference starker than in the massive social and economic disruptions introduced by the pandemic. Feminist economic analysis has been addressing the differential effects of poverty, development, international trade, and international finance for over 50 years. The theme of this 15th conference, from inequality and vulnerabilities to prosperity for all, enables this inaugural Gender and Development Forum, GDF, to recenter feminist analysis on the global political economy to achieve many objectives directly related to promoting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. With over 4 million lives lost worldwide to COVID-19, it seems a minor inconvenience that after several postponements and a shift to virtual delivery, we are finally here. We are here and nothing can stop us. Not the eruption of La Soufrière volcano in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in April 2021, which displaced nearly 40% of the population and blanketed our fields and hills in volcanic ash. Nor the fury of Hurricane Elsa, which damaged over 2,000 Barbadian homes. We are here and we are ready to virtually welcome you to our island home, Barbados, and to celebrate this historic occasion. We commence our evening with a performance by Dance in Africa entitled Sinte, choreographed by Keisha Dowridge. This performance is a unique traditional West African dance which focuses on the rhythmic movements and emotions celebrated in life. As the circle of life continues to revolve, so do our daily encounters, bringing us closer together through song, dance, and new life. Let us all welcome the award-winning community group Dance in Africa with Sinte. That was Dance in Africa with a scintillating performance of Sinte. We now invite lead organizer of the Gender and Development Forum, UNCTAD 15, Professor of Gender and Public Policy at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow Unit, and former Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill Campus, Professor the Most Honorable V. Udine Barato, to deliver the welcome.
The Honorable Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, heads of governments, Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, Ms. Isabel Durant, Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD, Dr. Mariama Williams, our distinguished keynote speaker, representatives of the UNCTAD member states, civil society organizations, and the staff of the Gender, Trade, and Development Division of UNCTAD, our many participants and friends from across the Global South, members of the Planning and Consultative Committee for the Gender and Development Forum, UNCTAD 15, distinguished guests all, on behalf of the Consultative Planning Committee, involving colleagues from UNCTAD's Gender, Trade, and Development Division and networks from the Global South, I welcome you to Barbados, a most beautiful Caribbean island state. I welcome you to the opening ceremony for the first ever Gender and Development Forum of the UNCTAD quadrennial cycle of conferences. We thank the division of Prime Minister Amor Motley and the UNCTAD's leadership in deciding that its 15th ministerial conference in Barbados should include a forum to examine and make recommendations on the intersecting issues of gender, trade, and development. This inaugural forum builds on the stated commitment in the Nairobi Maafikiano, in which UNCTAD reaffirmed its commitment to inclusiveness and to ensuring that all people, all women, children, youth, elderly persons, persons with disabilities, migrants, indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, and others in vulnerable situations, that all have access to resources and opportunities. The planners and participants of this forum fully agree, and we have fully accepted the responsibility for inclusiveness and for ensuring that our analysis and recommendations work to move citizens of all member states from lingering conditions of inequalities and vulnerabilities towards prosperity for all. We applaud the foresight of the Nairobi Agreement in reaffirming that the inclusion of marginalized peoples and equitable access and distribution of resources contribute to strengthening the economic and social pillars of sustainable development. UNCTAD's 14th session could not have anticipated a more appropriate time for necessitating transformation in the multiple problematic approaches in which global economic and social relations are organized. Now is the time to alter the diverse mechanisms which increasingly marginalize the countries and citizens of the Global South in Asia and Africa, the Caribbean and Latin America, the Pacific and Europe. The GDF, which is the Gender and Development Forum, focuses on the immediacy of three intersecting crises and how they exacerbate inequalities and vulnerabilities. There is a global health crisis induced by the COVID-19 pandemic, a global economic crisis triggered by the pandemic, the climate crisis, which is a direct consequence of the present growth model, which places emphasis on a rapid extraction and consumption and ignores the fact that the resources of the earth are finite. Our deliberations and recommendations over the next 3 days will indicate what UNCTAD member countries must do to work towards prosperity for all. We have organized 3 dynamic days of keynote lectures, seminars, lightning talks, roundtables, and interviews on multiple sub-themes of these 4 major themes. The first, climate adaptation and sustainability, rethinking development and trade. 2, indigenous knowledge and technologies. 3, gender dimensions of economic, financial, and health crises, and of course, with a focus on the COVID-19 pandemic. And 4th, the regional trade agreements and their impact on unequal relations of gender. Our focus is deliberately broader than trade. We use a feminist analysis of unequal relations of gender, fully aware that gender inequalities permeate all social and economic relations. Our focus includes systemic macroeconomic issues such as finance, debt, taxation, and the power imbalances of the global political economy. We advance a critical understanding of e-commerce while analyzing where our governments, and I mean the governments of the Global South, where our governments' responses to the COVID-19 pandemic have been largely regressive and neoliberal, and which are acutely impacting women and girls who bear the disproportionate burden of care work. We consider an exploration of UNCTAD's linkages with the UN human rights system. We hope you will attend the other sessions. For example, we are delighted that on the 28th, our panel on the future of work will be led by Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD, Ms. Isabelle Durant, who is a lead presenter, and that tomorrow, Director of the International Trade Center, Ms. Pamela Coke-Hamilton, will present a lightning talk on the future prospects on gender, international trade and development, and UNCTAD. What unites all of these engaging presentations over the next 3 days are 2 salient features. The first, the absolute relevance of feminist economic analysis in dissecting the issues of trade and development using the social relations of gender to analyze macroeconomic activity. And the second, avoiding the essentializing trap that a focus on the care economy. Let me take you back a bit. Avoiding the essentializing trap that a focus on the care economy, so obvious in the social and economic ruptures produced by the COVID-induced health crisis, does not result in, as Professor Bridget Young has warned, in returning women to and imprisoning them in traditional caring roles. When women's economic contributions are reduced to and only perceived as care work, this sets women back in the workplace, in pension entitlements, for example, and in relevance and support in other economic sectors. This is a critical observation that the Forum cares very much about, since in these intersecting crises which we are experiencing, The care economy has received a lot of attention. Yet, our sessions will demonstrate that the laudable feminist engagements on behalf of the care economy has overemphasized the social consequences of the pandemic to the detriment of revealing how macroeconomics fundamentally influence the productive capacity of the economy. The Gender and Development Forum heeds the warning by Professor Young that framing the issue of care work as women's work leaves women anchored to and solely responsible for the care sector and makes it more difficult to change the wider discourse. What is particularly perverse in post-recovery planning and budgeting is that the bulk of resources don't go to the care sector, and even though women are concentrated there. So we encourage you to attend and participate over the next 3 days and join us in transforming the policies and programs on gender, trade, and development. On September 28, we will release the Bridgetown Declaration of the Gender and Development Forum. This advocates gender justice, just trade regimes, a rethinking of development, and a reaffirmation of the benefits of applying feminist analysis to the intersections of gender, trade, and development. We see this as the first step towards UNCTAD 16 in 4 years' time. Today, even in the midst of the health, economic, and climate crises, even though we are experiencing these, we pause to celebrate this forum and to welcome you. We also welcome and celebrate Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, incoming Secretary General of UNCTAD, a Costa Rican and first woman and Latin American citizen to hold this position. Let us applaud her. We welcome and celebrate Ms. Pamela Cork Hamilton, Jamaican and director of the International Trade Center. We applaud and celebrate her too. And finally, we welcome and celebrate Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Nigerian and the first woman and the first African to be appointed Director General of the World Trade Organization. But more critically, for the Gender and Development Forum, we celebrate the women of the world, particularly the women of the Global South. We welcome all of you and thank you very much for being here. We will have a great 3 days and we look forward to your full participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Barreto. Unbought and Unbossed was conceptualized, choreographed, and directed by award-winning choreographer Aisha Comishong and pays tribute to the phenomenal icon, Barbadian-American Shirley Chisholm. Wearing multiple hats as politician, educator, and author, among others, Shirley Chisholm contributed to the making and inspiring of multiple breakthroughs for women, especially Black women, in areas of traditional male dominance. Ms. Chisholm's example was a source of great inspiration right here in her maternal homeland of Barbados. Undoubtedly, several of our women trailblazers were impacted by Ms. Chisholm's often repeated advice: if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Please welcome to our opening ceremony, Rhythm Tribe.
trip took 9 days on the rough Atlantic, all the way to Bridgetown, Barbados. I still remember arriving. We boarded the bus to ride to the village of Vauxhall where we were going to live. Grandmother decided it was time for me to start in the village school. Years later, I would know what an important gift my parents had given me with my early education in the schools of Barbados. If I speak and write easily now, that early education is the main reason. Granny gave me strength, dignity, and love. I learned from an early age that I was somebody.
Distinguished panelists and participants, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to the Gender and Development Forum of our 15th Conference of UNCTAD, whose theme, From Inequality and Vulnerability to Prosperity for All, is more urgent than ever. This is only my second week as UNCTAD Secretary General. With time, you will get to know me, but I take this opportunity to assure you that I come with a great sense of responsibility, deeply aware of the incredibly testing times that we are in, but also deeply aware of what it means to be UNCTAD's first female Secretary General. I vow to you that, as I have done all my life, I will do all that I can to advance the gender equality agenda. We have a lot of work to do in that respect, and I ask you to count on me to do it together. We stand at a critical moment in the history of multilateralism, in the history of the United Nations, and in the history of UNCTAD itself. The COVID-19 pandemic has proved to be one of the largest challenges of our generation, producing big setbacks in the hard-won progress in the reduction of poverty and inequality, and in the progress made in the previous decades on gender equality and on the Sustainable Development Goals. This crisis, we know, is not over, and many developing regions are seriously facing the prospect of another lost decade, exactly at the time when efforts towards achieving the 2030 Agenda should be coming into full gear. Unfortunately, the negative effect of this pandemic on gender equality has been even greater. According to the World Economic Forum, we women needed to wait 99 years to achieve full equality with men before the pandemic arrived. Now, after COVID, this already inexcusably high number has passed from 99 years to 136. So when it comes to gender, we are not talking about another lost decade. We are talking about almost 4. This is an unacceptable time span, especially considering that removing gender inequalities in all fields will be in line with human rights commitments, provide huge long-term societal benefits, foster solutions to climate change challenges, decrease instability globally and at the country level, and yield significant economic benefits. In a word, decreasing the gender gap helps decrease all others. Much therefore hinges on how much and how quickly we can revert and recover from these setbacks. And here the news are mixed. As shown by our Trade and Development Report released just last week, we are witnessing a robust but divergent global recovery, with advanced countries growing and vaccinating at rates that are multiples of those in the developing world, who have borne the greatest brand of all. In a word, if we follow the current trajectory, this is a recovery that will leave many people behind, a recovery that will widen gaps, a recovery that will not be prosperity for all. Behind this recovery divergence lurks one of the greatest lessons of this pandemic. Where there is inequality, there is fragility. And when shocks come, gaps widen. And those that were already suffering, suffer the most. In a world where shocks are increasingly common, we must see that the pre-pandemic business as usual was leading us only to the mirage of progress, to development that was only temporary and therefore unsustainable. That is why we include more and more the word resilience in our Sustainable Development Goals, because shocks should not shock us any longer. Dear delegates, we must be very clear about this. Economic downturns, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, are not gender neutral. They affect men and women differently, mainly because of gender segmentation into different industries and sectors. The structure of markets and institutions and the inequalities within them, and the still disproportionate burden on women on the care and domestic work. We now know that unless we solve these inequalities, the pursuit of the SDGs will be impossible. We know 53 of the 251 SDGs indicators make explicit reference to gender equality, women and girls. Therefore, reacting to the COVID-19 pandemic without assessing its distinct impact on men and women jeopardizes the overall achievement of the 2030 Agenda and risk reversing the progress achieved so far in closing most gaps in most domains. But we also know that it's not only to have the gender perspective, that unless women are sitting at the table in the decision-making processes, the policy decisions that will be taken will be very probably biased, gender blind, and much less effective to recover from the crisis. Because women are an important part of the solution, because they are a transformative and indispensable force to build back better. Unfortunately, we do not see this happening as we expected and as the world needs. This Gender and Development Forum is an opportunity to help. It will provide a critical space of debate and reflection on a wide range of issues, from agriculture to industrial policy, from education and training to labor market needs, from environmental challenges to human rights-based solutions. Against this backdrop of rising inequalities worldwide, there is a need to align economic, trade, and labor and environmental policies, to mention a few, to human rights principles. The Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action, as well as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, make clear calls on governments to ensure that their trade policies do not have adverse impacts on women. Thanks to our collective efforts these past years, the number of initiatives that aim to mainstream gender into trade have rapidly increased over time. The new initiative taken by the trade community, for example, specific trade and gender chapters included in free trade agreements, as well as ex-ante assessments of the likely gender impacts of trade reforms. Initiatives that take multilaterally or by groups of like-minded countries are welcome and show a new way of looking at the nexus between trade policy and gender equality, and a commitment to use trade policy to empower women. Nevertheless, we should not be complacent with what has been achieved so far. While trade has created new opportunities for some women, it has also marginalized others. Rural women are often unable to compete with imported products, especially if such products benefit from generous subsidies, with crowding out effects. New wage employment opportunities have become available to women, but very often for blue-collar jobs only. The services sector is becoming the main employer of women, accounting for 58% of female employment worldwide. Still, women tend to be clustered in low-skill, non-tradable subsectors. We need to move then from a narrow focus on bringing women into trade to a broader view that ensures that they engage under fair terms and that countries have the space to put in place policies that allow this to happen. And these are but a few of the challenges, all of which are complex and require of us solutions that are nuanced, holistic, and far-reaching. Dear delegates, there is much work ahead, and the stakes could not be higher. It should be very clear to us that all the current recovery is insufficient and unsatisfactory for both society at large and for women in particular. We must increase our efforts, and every one of us should be empowered by the recognition that there is much each of us can do to help. We hope that the discussions that will take place during the forum will provide important inputs for the deliberations of UNCTAD 15 and for our future mandate on gender issues, which I hope to make a key priority of my leadership. To conclude, I wish to thank the government of Barbados, our host for UNCTAD 15, as well as our co-organizers of this forum for making this crucial event possible. Thank you, Prime Minister Motley, for your inspiring leadership. And let me take this opportunity to thank also all the women that fought for our rights before us and that allowed us to be where we are today. So, this is a moment to remember that this is not an individual but a collective fight. I look forward to your declaration and I wish you all very fruitful deliberations ahead.
Kelly Cadogan is a singer, songwriter, vocal trainer, coach. Her music is inspirational and consistently gives a taste of her vocal range, rich tone, expressive improvisational skills, and performance aptitude. She has released 2 albums called The Nearness of You and Believe, and for the past 8 years has been the show producer, director, and headliner of the event Walking in My Own Shoes, a jazz and vocal showcase held right here in Barbados. The Kelly Cadogan Band consists skilled and qualified musicians, drummer Andre Ford, bassist Richard Bill Evans, and keyboardist and bandleader Dr. Stefan Walcott. With lead vocalist Kelly Cadogan singing Walking in My Own Shoes, please help me welcome the Kelly Cadogan Band.
So many times you said I can't do it. Well, I am here to prove you wrong. If I conceive it and I believe it, I know the love of God is leading me on. Ooh, too often I give up so easy when things don't go my way. In every trial there is a triumph. I'm gonna walk my journey all the way. I'm walking in my own shoes. I'm walking in my own shoes. Walking in my own shoes. Walking in my own shoes. right, sometimes shaky, but I'm gonna keep pushing on. If I conceive it and I believe it, I know the love of God is holding me strong. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I can't give up now, been here for too long. See me step into my God-given dreams. I'm walking in my own shoes. I'm walking in my own shoes. Walking in my own shoes. Walking in my own shoes. Who created me? And who provides for me? Gives me great ideas. God will, God will, God will. Who created you? And who provides for you? Gives you courage to live out your destiny. Walking in my own shoes, see me stepping. Woo! God is providing. Walking in my own shoes.
That was the Kelly Cadogan Band, featuring Andre Ford, Richard Bill Evans, Dr. Stefan Walcott, and Kelly Cadogan. We now give a very warm welcome to the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Amor-Motley, QC, MP, who is the 8th person to hold the position of Prime Minister in Barbados and the first woman. Barbados is the first Caribbean country and the first small island developing state ever to host a session of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And we are excited to bring Barbados to you in this virtual conference. We now invite Prime Minister Motley to give the Barbados welcome.
Hello everyone. Let me on behalf of the government and people of Barbados offer a warm welcome to those of you in the audience today, whether you're joining us live in Bridgetown or online from across the world. We truly wish that you could all have been here in person to participate in this opening ceremony for the UNCTAD 15 Gender and Development Forum. Equally, we wish you had all been able to enjoy the beautiful setting of the Errol Barrows Centre for Creative Imagination within the Cave Hill campus of our University of the West Indies, and that you would have had an opportunity to acquaint yourselves with the significant work being done by its Institute for Gender and Development Studies. Sadly, COVID-19 stepped in, and it has made us alter all of our plans. But thanks to technology, it cannot stop our voices from being heard. Let me also thank, at the beginning, our national lead organizer, Professor the Most Honorable Udine Barreto, and the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Rebecca Greenspan, for their opening remarks, and for so beautifully setting the stage, or as we in the Caribbean would say, for rolling the wicket for the convening of the Gender and Development Forum as an integral part of UNCTAD 15. And also, let me give a very special welcome to our Caribbean sister, Dr. Mariama Williams, our distinguished keynote speaker at today's proceedings. I will tell you that one of the very first decisions I made in the initial stages of our host country discussions with the UNCTAD Secretariat was to agree to the inclusion of a dedicated forum on gender and development as an official pre-event for the program of UNCTAD 15. Now, we all know that the UNCTAD Secretariat has a well-established trade, gender and development program, which is committed to promoting gender equality and women's economic empowerment through inclusive economic and trade policies. And we also know that the negotiated outcome text for these conferences, have made significant advances in that regard and now contains specific mandates for the mainstreaming of gender perspectives across UNCTAD's work. But while there have been many sessions and roundtables and expert groups on gender and trade organized by the Secretariat, I am told that this is the first time that there has been a 3-day forum of this nature and that it will be held in the lead up to the UNCTAD ministerial. I'm immensely proud, therefore, that Barbados has been given the opportunity to host UNCTAD 15's inaugural Gender and Development Forum. I know that Professor Barreto and her co-organizer, Dr. Tonya Haynes, have worked tirelessly to coordinate this event with their Global Gender Network counterparts and in consultation with the Secretariat's focal point. I salute them all for their commitment and dedication. This forum could not have come at a more opportune time. And let me explain to you exactly what I mean by that. Our conference theme, From Inequality and Vulnerability to Prosperity for All, resonates directly with you. So too do the emerging priorities which are likely to preoccupy the ministerial discussions at UNCTAD 15, including, of course, the COVID crisis, the climate crisis, food security, the debt crisis, and the issue of financing for development. Dealing with just one of these issues would be seriously challenging. Dealing with all of them at once is nothing short of catastrophic. This unprecedented convergence further exacerbates the very inequalities and vulnerabilities that we are aiming to address. And as I certainly don't have to tell you, the economic and social impact of our current circumstances falls, regrettably, disproportionately on women and girls. That is why at this moment in time, your forum matters, your advocacy matters, and your solutions-oriented critical thinking matters. You will be meeting on the eve of the first trade ministerial to be convened post-COVID. UNCTAD 15 will certainly be affected by the realization that there is now no normal left to be returned to, and that a complete reset of the international economic development paradigm is urgently required. I've said it before and I'll repeat it here again. If at this unique moment of history we cannot succeed in moving the policy needle, then believe you me, we never will. And if indeed we cannot, then what future is there for small island developing states like my own, Barbados? If even before the pandemic we were treated as invisible and dispensable, what will they now consider us to be? That is why the most critical requirement for all of us right now is moral strategic leadership. Political leadership, yes, but not exclusively so. Governments alone cannot help us build forward better. We can only hope to succeed if there's leadership at every level and in every sector of our societies. And this includes all of you, all of us. I've had cause to think about this a few weeks ago during the session at the Cave Hill campus organized between myself and Professor Jeffrey Sachs on sustainable island futures. Those of you who watched may remember that he said, and I swear, I didn't prompt him, that he thought it was scientifically provable that women have been better leaders in this period of crisis. And he wanted to see a lot more of us. He also said that issues cannot be solved by confrontation. So what, might you ask, does this have to do with UNCTAD 15 or trade and development, or indeed your Gender and Development Forum? Well, let us look at it this way. In March this year, the first female head of the World Trade Organization assumed office. She was followed in September by the first female Secretary General of UNCTAD. The Executive Director of the International Trade Center is also a woman and from the Caribbean. These are certainly not, believe you me, not token appointees. And their combined presence and influence at the heart of the international trade and development structure in Geneva sends a powerful message that more inclusive and gender-sensitive trade and development policies might now be there, given the priority they deserve. And we say that knowing that Ngozi, Rebecca, and Pamela will be a powerful triumvirate to represent our agenda. And so, my friends, as we seek to exploit these synergies in a positive and progressive manner, we have to determine how we can do it best. Your discussions and your brainstorming in the Gender and Development Forum can make a significant contribution to the process of transformation that we all so urgently need. I look forward to receiving the statements and declarations you will produce and bring to the attention of the Ministerial Conference when they're completed. I am confident that they will be of immense value to the work of UNCTAD, and I anticipate that the Gender and Development Forum will be institutionalized as a permanent event on the program of future conferences. I wish you all the best, and I thank you for your participation and for your listening. All the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister, the Honorable Mia Amor Motley. Celebrated community group Dance in Africa, featuring drumming by the Pompasetters, performs another award-winning choreography by Keisha Dowridge. The piece, called Becoming, was awarded silver at the 2019 National Independence Festival of Creative Arts. Life's journey can be filled with obstacles, but as we transition to womanhood, we seek to embrace and acknowledge the path that has been laid for us. We put on our big girl pants and walk out as queens, ready to take on the world. Here is Dance in Africa Juniors with Becoming.
Stem, toi coucou, stem, 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 toi coucou. Stem, toi coucou, stem, 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 toi coucou. Stem, toi coucou, stem, 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 toi coucou. Tu te dis, stem, toi coucou, stem, 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 toi coucou.
That was Dancing Africa Juniors with their presentation of Becoming. Mariama Williams, PhD, is a feminist economist with over 20 years' experience working on economic development, macroeconomic, trade, external debt, and finance issues with a focus on gender equality and women's empowerment, social equity, sustainable finance, and development and climate change issues. Her books and publications include Gender and Climate Finance, Coming Out of the Margins, Gender Issues in the Multilateral Trading System, Trading Stories, Experiences with Gender and Trade, co-edited with Marilyn Carr, Africa's Trade and Environment Policy, an Encyclopedia on Trade and Environment, and 3 Decades of Climate Mitigation, Why Haven't We Bent the Global Emissions Curve? Williams is also a director of the Institute of Law and Economics, Jamaica, a member of the Caribbean Feminist Action Network, the Gender and Trade Coalition, and a principal consultant, the Integrated Policy Research Institute, and senior associate, the Political Ecology and Sustainability Program, Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era. Williams' other achievements and associations include former coordinator, Sustainable Development, Climate Change and Gender Program, the South Center, an intergovernmental think tank of developing countries. A member of the advisory group of the SG's High-Level Task Force on Financing for Gender Equality, 2019 to 2020. UN Women's Expert Advisory Group, the SDG Monitoring Report, the Board of Trustee for the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation, Sweden, a member of the Steering Committee of Development for Women in New Era, a member of the International Working Group on Gender and Macroeconomics and International Trade, a past member of the Board and Planning Committee for the Biannual Forum for the Association for Women for Development, and coordinator, research advisor, the International Gender and Trade Network. Please welcome Dr. Mariama Williams to deliver today's keynote address.
All right. So thank you very much for this warm welcome, and it's wonderful to see you all. I would like to first observe all the protocol. Thank you to the Honorable Prime Minister of Barbados for really her persistence and her commitment in really struggling and working hard to make sure that this forum takes place. This is the first forum on gender and development in UNCTAD 56 years, as Pamela Coke-Hamilton reminded us. And it's a unique forum, a unique opportunity for us to move this agenda forward in the context of UNCTAD. Welcoming Dr. Rebecca Greenspan, who is now the incoming director, as was noted before, of UNCTAD, as well as Ms. Isabella Durant, Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD. And I want to thank and really express gracious gratitude from civil society, in particular the Gender and Trade Coalition, to Dr. Barito and the organizers for really the extensive set of consultations that you have engaged in with civil society from all of the regions of the world, primarily women's organizations, but any organizations interested in gender and development and gender equality, women's economic empowerment. You've had the regional seminar, you've had the Caribbean consultation, a global consultation, and the day has finally arrived, and we are here. Thank you very much. Welcome all the representatives of UNCTAD member state and all the civil society participation all over the world from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and members specifically thanking the Planning Committee here in Barbados and all of you distinguished guests who have managed to be here today. I have a lot, if I can remember how to do my PowerPoint, yes, to talk about, so I'll try to do it pretty quickly and efficiently, leaving time for us to have some dialogue. So in thinking about this presentation today, I basically have been inspired by 2 things. One is what we in climate call the Talanoa dialogue. And the Talanoa dialogue came at a critical moment in the United Nations Framework Convention discussion, when there was a lot of tension going on between North and South and within and between governments. And the government of Fiji was the president of the COP. And they proposed a technique they use in the Pacific called the Talanoa. And the Talanoa Dialogue was established right before COP24 on the way to the Paris Agreement. And it basically is a way of participation and consultation. And it was framed around these three questions that we were all asked as governments, civil society, research institutions to discuss, and a platform was open for submissions. And the dialogue was, where are we? Where are we now in terms of the climate discussion? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? And I thought I would borrow that framework for this presentation tonight on gender and development, because gender and trade and gender and development has been around for a good 30 years. Academically, policy and practices in the global society. Now we see institutional players like the World Bank, the WTO producing reports on it, but it's been around a long time. So I just want to establish that. So the context for me now is, where are we? And if I remember what I was told, yes. So the questions for further elaboration as we look at where are we is in terms of the global development, economic development, and the intersectionality of gender and trade. What are the challenges, responses, and initiatives that have been involved, and what work, and how are they? And where do we want to go? It's really about what is the pandemic recovery and beyond? What's the vision beyond that for us as a society if we're pushing gender justice, trade justice, and climate justice? Because there are three different justices that must be brought together within gender and development discussion. And in terms of global economics, where do we want to go? And how do we get there? Where do we want to go and how do we get there? What are the provisions that are instituted in terms of the ecosystem for gender and trade and the governance of gender and trade? So in terms of how do we get there? Again, that's the 5 pillars or 4 pillars that the professor spoke about, which is the rethinking of development, looking at adaptation, sustainability, and all of those issues. And then what are the approaches and models that are out there? What are they saying? And what are feminists saying? What are civil society saying? What are the key stakeholders of gender and trade saying? So I want to start first with the question of where are we? And as we know, I won't belabor the pandemic because it's fairly well written about, that it has disrupted political and social system. And it's the first evidence for us who work on climate change of what a disorderly transition will look like, which is why we've been pushing governments to take action now so we don't face a disorderly trend. So COVID really is kind of microcosm of what will happen if we don't do what we need to do for climate, right? There's a lot of risk, and we know that the risks are not the same for everyone. For working poor, male and female workers, for Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC, for lower and middle income people. We are now captured by the mantra promulgated by the G20, and the G7 first started it, and we have it with the World Bank, about building back better. And many in civil society and feminists are saying, no, we don't want to build back better because we don't want to go back. What we want to do is we want to build forward better. So these 2 different mantras are out there: build back better, build back forward. And so in the context of these crises, what are the kind of appropriate response that we want to do? So first we want to look at what is going on. Where are we in terms of development and gender and development? And we have fairly good examples of what's going on from gender perspective because all of the regions have done their Beijing plus 25 consultation. And so there's tremendous literature saying what has happened in each region and in each country around gender and development. So we don't need to visit that, and I won't go into that in detail. Then there's climate change, which interlink with trade, especially for agriculture, forestry, water, and essential things. There is that interlink between climate change and the pandemic, which I'll come back to in a minute. And then there's COVID and what it has meant for where we are and what it means for where we might want to go. I want to flag a little bit before I go any further about gender and trade, all right? Dr. Barito spoke about UNCTAD 2016, where the decision was made that UNCTAD needs to deepen its work on gender and trade. And UNCTAD has been involved in gender and trade since at least 2000. It is not new, right? UNCTAD was a focal point for the UN system on gender and trade. And in that capacity, produced many reports and many different organizing meetings with civil society, academics. But after 2016, that work deepened, and UNCTAD got its own gender, and it was no longer a focal point for the UN system. It was working as UNCTAD, doing what UNCTAD does, which is to research policy directions around gender and trade issues. What we see is that in the intervening years, right, there has been now a Buenos Aires Declaration out of the WTO, where 127 countries have ascertained that, yes, trade does have impact on gender and trade. And I need to move my slides, okay? So we've talked about the Nairobi mandates. I won't go into that. So the other initiatives on gender and trade, I'll quickly go through that so you get a sense of where the discussion is going. The WTO, Buenos Aires Declaration, right, in 2019, 2018. The WTO, as of August of last year, now has an informal working group on gender and trade. And their aim is to actually increase that work on gender and trade. We have now gender-responsive management on trade between different countries, in particular Canada, Chile, and New Zealand have set up a mechanism. And we have the OECD has now, since September 2020, has put out an entire volume on gender and trade, using what they call gender-based analysis, not feminist, gender-based analysis. And I've come up, it's interesting, I looked at it, and also the WTO and the World Bank have produced a report also last year looking at gender and trade. And basically, it comes back to the very same points. Nothing new that feminists have been saying for 20 years since Suzanne Yokes and Ann Weston first came out with the book Women in Trade, and the countless number of articles and academic work that has been done on gender and trade. Data, some data, but the basic starting point is, of course, women are impacted because of their triple role as workers, consumers, heads of households and businesses, and then looking at regional determination. From the point of view of gender and governance, we'll see that regional trade entities, there are about 80 of them that have declared that have some reference to gender in their context, mainly rhetorical, mainly affirming ILO conventions and so forth. We have 4 RTAs that are enforced, notified to the WTO, that have standalone gender chapter, and you'll see that most of those are developing countries, okay? There's no RTA chapter in any developed country's trade policy. So we'll hear a lot of resistance, a lot of talk that developing countries are resistant to gender. But when you look at who is actually doing it, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's developing countries who are at the forefront of integrating gender into trade agreements and policies. Much more needs to be done, of course, right? Climate change. I'm going to quickly go through this. I'm not spending too much time here, but we know that climate change is also interlinked with COVID-19. COVID-19 was supposed to reduce global warming, and it did initially, but we know the numbers are going back up. We also know that COVID-19 and the response to it is increasing environmental degradation, right? The mask that we wear, the PPPs, the gels, they're all plastics, and they create biohazard, which cannot go simply thrown away. So the whole pandemic itself is actually intensifying many of the dimensions that are critical to women's lives globally. So I just put this here, and I won't go through them a lot, because we'll see that when I first went to climate negotiation, and we're looking at trade and climate now, there was a sense in which developed countries thought they didn't have to worry about adaptation. It was focused on mitigation, because adaptation was something that happened to poor countries who were unprepared or irresponsible. The fact is that the floods that have happened in recent times have happened in Germany. We have fire in Canada. And so when you look at these things, you're seeing them as pictures out of Europe, not pictures out of the Caribbean or other parts of the world. So that climate is very real and very much having great impact on the lives of people in the North. And I wonder to what extent that will expedite some of the things that we've been fighting for over the many years, especially in terms of adaptation and loss and damage. So the COVID pandemic, I won't belabor the point, we know. And I like this quote by Isabel Sahil and company that says, like the flash of an X-ray, the pandemic exposed the deep fractures in our society based on race, class, gender, and economic status. And some of those fragilities are around access to finance, poor health of many people, including women, precarious employment, and all the various things that we've all studied across the globe in our work, right? And then in our consultations across the regions, we've had some snapshots of what's happening to women who are not usually the people reported about in academic studies. For instance, Red Thread from Guyana reported about what's the unequal burden of women tackling housework and remote learning of children, and the increased domestic violence and sexual abuse of the lockdown and the lack of safety and privacy. We also heard from Trinidad, from Nude, about what's happening to domestic workers who are bearing the burden of some of the brunt in the sense that they're losing jobs. Many of them are working and not getting paid their proper wages. So there's all dimensions of what COVID is doing, apart from what we talk about in terms of retrogression of gender policy and gender activities. I like this other quote. It's a very nice publication by Isabel Sahil and company that says, the pandemic is a vivid and even brutal reminder that health is an essential ingredient of a good life. Good physical health is a measure of subjective well-being, which is one of the tenets that feminists have been arguing about for a many long time. So this is where we're coming from. Now, where do we want to go? Again, I draw here from the literature, from feminist economics, from the discussions that we've had as a group in the regional consultation and the global consultation, and many of the work that's been done by people such as yourself, which is that we want a society that heals the fractures that have been mentioned. We want investing in healthcare. We want to improve nutrition and social service. We want a society that really takes care of people's well-being, empowers women, and where government assumes the fundamental responsibility to maximize the subjective well-being of their citizens. For many in the Pacific and in the Caribbean, also stewardship over the ocean and the seas are critical to the things that we want to get done and we want to see worked on. Also in our consultation, it was flagged by Ceramis that we need to mend the gender gap in STEM. We see one of the output of and the landscape that will change with COVID is the further digitalization of the economy. If we are not educating girls and women with STEM, they'll be further left behind. So those are now some of the critical. Now, how do we get where we want to go? And this is the age-old question of what is economic development, what are the qualities of sustainable development, and what it is that we need to do. All right? And Professor Barito, I put that quote up because it was also part of the consultation document, which I think is pretty important for us to recognize that we need to advance gender mainstreaming, yes, but gender mainstreaming is not a panacea. It has to look at outcomes, input, and what's going on in the lives of women and men, and not just a checkbox or a methodological issue, which for many places it's becoming increasingly thus. We need to build a system that is capable of delivering gender equality, including investment in care, child care, elderly care. I think the pandemic has really brought these things to the fore. We need also to join the global demand for universal basic income and measures that counter the trend in the downward systematic trend in wages across the globe, as well as within our community. We need a transformative justice framework that really looks at gender-based violence beyond mass incarceration. We don't need more men and boys going to prison. We need to transform, to root out at its core the sources and the drivers of gender-based violence. Some of that is in patriarchy. Some of that is in our religion. We can't shy away from that. and some of it is societal and cultural. And we need to work hard with whomever we need to move those dimensions. We need to see the reworking of social contracts, right? And the redefinition of, and these are beginning to be embedded in calls for Green New Deals, inclusive discussions about climate change, and where we want to go is predicated up on the movement in policy, right? And the critiques of feminist economics, right? Now, in looking at a lot of the recovery from COVID, it was very interesting, this quote by the head of the Hawaii Department of Human Services. She said, if a plan isn't feminist, it's patriarchal and will fail to deliver a resilient, strong economy. And I think that's where feminists grounds our approach to where we want to do when we build back, or we say we want to build forward and not build back, because where we're coming from is not where we want to go back to. We want to move in a direction that really improves people's lives in a significant way. And that means that we need to develop policies and approaches that undergird the economy, undergird social development, and at the macro level, for many of us in SIDS, and in particular SIDS in the Caribbean, the debt load is overwhelming. And this debt load will get worse, and I'll come to that in a minute, quickly. Because we are currently in a low interest environment since the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. As inflation rises, and we see inflation arising with regards to the shortage in supply chain and so forth, interest rate will be bound to rise. The central banks are fighting that. When that interest rate rises, our debt will rise. But at the same time, governments are borrowing more money to meet the pandemic, which means that ultimately the debt will spiral. The temporary stopgap measures that have been provided by the IMF and the World Bank will end this year and maybe extended to middle next year. But what we see down the line is rising debt burden and debt crisis. We need to also have more intense regional integration. And we know what's going on in our region, right? We've been trying to do regional integration now for, God knows, from the West Indian Federation till now, and we still haven't managed to get it right. And where we are is still problematic in terms of what we deal with, and you're aware of what's going on right now with CARICOM, that even when the governments of the world got together recently to put together a statement on Haiti, they ignored CARICOM. Now that's a serious thing, to ignore a regional institution when you put out a communique about one of their member states. But it speaks to who we are and how we've been seen in the world economy. To survive post-COVID, every literature that I have combed, says that one of the essential features is tighter regional integration. That is not something that we have in our region. The Africans have now the African Free Trade Continental Agreement, which is vast and comprehensive. Asia, certainly, right? RCEP and others. And so they're ready. The Caribbean, not so much yet. So we need to really work a lot and seeing, and it has to be regional integration from the bottom up, because from the top down is not working so much. So we need to do a lot of work on that. Most importantly, we need to rethink development in the post-COVID era. And here there's a really lovely article, and I don't often laud world development, but it's an article by Leach et al. And they argue that COVID exposes the limits of conventional framing of development, both in the North and South, because of the existing fragility in health, food, sustainable livelihood, employment, trade, and finance. So what is development? Well, if you look at development as a progressive social economic process, then what's important, are, of course, we now have a category coming out of COVID, essential workers. And those essential workers, we have all known, we know who they are. We've known it for a very long time. There are nurses, or doctors, or teachers, our gardeners, our helpers, all of the people. Local production markets, that's one of the truly sustainable thing that have risen out of COVID, is the importance of being able to have your food produced and to be able to have the network of local production networks in the communities that have managed to help each other through solidarity, through the gift economy. Rethinking the value and the purpose of the economy. So there's a lot of academic work going on to it, focusing on social reproduction, but also considering the planetary boundaries, which is something we in the Caribbean and SIDS cannot afford not to think about. We're already breaching at least 5 of the 9 planetary boundaries that Ronstrom created. So we have a lot of economic models that are contending out there. We have the traditional Washington consensus, right, which gave us structural adjustment among other things. But now there's a Wall Street consensus. There's a great article by Daniel Gabor that really explores this in very minute and sometimes scary details, because it's already working in our economies, but we don't know it. And this Washington consensus is about the financialization of development. It's that the World Bank and the G20s have all proposed to put institutional investors into development, all right? And these institutional investors are gonna be, the government has a new role, development state has a new role, and that new role is to escort international capital through public-private partnership into water, sanitation, health, but most importantly into our infrastructure. Right? And so this Wall Street consensus, which is as the blessings of the IFI, it is quite insidious, and it has potential to cripple and damage what we say we want. Right? Some people are saying it's a point of departure from the Washington consensus, but actually it is not. It's an extension of the Washington consensus, right? So the Washington consensus is supposed to have been neutered by the financial crisis. But in fact, this Wall Street consensus promotes the financialization of development through the proliferation of PPS, right? And it's putting the state to be the ultimate risk holder. So we're transferring risk from institutional investors, pension funds, sovereign wealth fund, onto the balance sheet of the state. It's called de-risking, right? So now the state's job is to de-risk and escort international capital. This will only intensify and increase public debt and public commitment, not about providing public services, but about meeting the needs of international financial capital. But what's most deadly about it, and the World Bank has what's called moving from trillions to billions, right? And the whole blended finance, is that it's insulating the international financial investors from things like rising minimum wage, things that we need. It's insulating them from climate justice and just transitions. So they'll be protected because the state will be the ultimate arbiter. And so we'll see increasingly that it will be a challenge to just transition based on gender equality, based on pro-poor work, based on rising minimum wage. And so we're going to be going back to what led to the financial crisis. We're going to see increased volatility of capital, protection for bondholders, so that they won't take part in debt services repudiation or debt restructuring. So this development policy space will be narrowed. So we have a narrow scope for what we want: green development based on just transition, shielding the poor and women from the burden of structural adjustment. Right? But there are other alternative models out there that we need to push and juxtapose against this Wall Street consensus. There's the donut economics, right? Which basically is an approach that's really grounding itself in preserving what's left of the planetary boundaries, linking it with social and justice-based phenomena. There's degrowth, right? Which is again saying, do we need more? We need to have less consumption, less production of the wrong type. There's also the circular economy, which is about regenerating our natural resources so that they work at the base for the community. There's solidarity economy, and I'm just flagging these for us because there are multiple ones, and we don't have time to go into all of those. And so all of this is the groundings for whatever we do in terms of gender and development and gender and trade. Now, different feminist economists might be aligned with different of these alternatives because they all are pretty much very much consolidated. And then their feminist economics, they're all about provisioning and provisioning in an ecologically sustainable way. The last one, which is a new and emerging one, coming out of mindfulness commitment. There's a whole big push for mindfulness. The British Parliament has it. Some of the Congress people in the US Congress are also big on mindfulness. I'm a big mindfulness proponent myself. So there's a whole range of approaches around mindful approach to economics and climate change adaptation. There's some scholarly literature on it to show mindfulness can help to reduce risk and risky behavior and how you can retool development through a process of mindfulness. These are all kind of emergent frameworks that are out there, some of them at different level. Just transition, which started with the trade union many years ago in the 1980s, it's now been taken on as a big discussion. And those of us who are in the feminist and development are saying, well, just transition can actually be imposed on inequality. So that just transitions have to be about taking repatriation. It has to be about taking care of harms that were done to indigenous people, to Black people. It has to be based on all the different inequalities in the world so that the just transitions narrative and discussion is a wider discussion than about labor, right? It's about the indigenous people. It's about all of us who were enslaved and colonized. It's about the repatriation. It's about the remaining entitlement that we have in the global climate space. It's also about just trade policies, gender just trade policies. I talked about the dangers and pitfalls, so I wouldn't go there. That was the Washington Consensus. So I'm going to end by saying that there are successful keys to sustainable development, right? And these have been discussed many years by many of our very good economists, Norman Gervin being one of them, Clive D. Beck, and all of those have been spending a lot of time and a lot of work written on it. But if you take them all and you look at them, you'll see that the keys are existing. We need a high capacity state which can function agilely. What COVID has shown, right, one of the lessons from COVID is that the state can be agile when it needs to, right? We've seen that. It can move resources, it can move when it needs to. So we have to figure out a way to continue that agility in the state to make it function in a way that it has democratic principles and that it has a mission to improve welfare. It has to be a state that's committed to redistribution to ensure gender equality, human development and security, and employment must be the grounding for macroeconomic policies. And we must also be able to have more attention and resource flow to community and rural infrastructure development and not simply at the top. So there are many mechanisms and processes for activating and the realization of these keys. They include, and it's well known, heterodox economists, feminist economists have been saying this for a very long time, public investment. That is what COVID has shown, that without public investment, we would not have the vaccine. Without public investment, economies would have crashed even worse than they were. The state is there, and the state can move, and it can deliver resources as necessary. We need to increase domestic production of food, of a basic necessity. And yes, foreign direct investment, but it must be in accordance with National Development Plan and Sustainable Development Goal. And we need to return to domestic planning. Right? For a while, the SDGs have been the national plan. Now we talk about NDCs, nationally determined contribution now becomes a national plan. They're integrated into the national plan. But the planning is a whole process of thinking through all of these things that we say we want and all of the keys and figuring out a way to be able to do that, all right? And I will leave you with that, okay? I have a strategic framework that I've been wrestling with for many years now, and I'll just let you have the PowerPoint on that because I think I've gone way over my time. So I thank you very much for your time. I think this Gender and Development Forum is the beginning of something important, something big. It's a way for those of us in the South who have been at the forefront of gender and development and gender and trade, which has now been taken over by institutional players and has now become a checklist. It's now become about justifying trade liberalization on multiple levels, can get back into the game, can seize the agenda and move it forward. And we must move it forward from UNCTAD 15 to UNCTAD 16 in very clear and significant ways, proposing methodologies that comes from understanding our economies and our struggle, for researching the impact of gender and trade, for thinking through how we look at integrating gender into trade policies and trade agreement beyond what we see existing now. Everybody's agreed, the literature has shown that yes, having gender chapters in trade agreement are a move forward, but they're not sufficient because they do not address, if you go to see them, they all are about domestic policies. They do not address trade agreements, how trade agreements impact women, boys, and girls, impact food, water, impacts power dynamics. So the feminist analysis isn't there. Gender-based analysis is there, right? Where you look at what's happening to men and women. But the feminist analysis and the analysis from the South, which is pretty powerful from developing countries, practitioners and economists who have been looking at all of this and are saying, yes, you talk about gender, we like the gender declaration. It's a movement in the right direction, but it's neither necessary or sufficient. It's just a movement. What's necessary and sufficient is to consider how trade and macroeconomic policy broadly influence women's and men's life in very significant way, with data, with resources, and moving finance to the bottom. Thank you.
Many thanks to Dr. Mariama Williams for that very insightful and empowering keynote address and the engaging dialogue with our virtual audience. The Barbados Community College Steel Ensemble is one of the many groups of performers who use the social distancing restrictions of the COVID-19 pandemic to create beautiful outdoor performances and recorded them for virtual audiences. Playing an arrangement by second-year music student Jerron Bentham, and under the direction of Pan Ensemble tutor Andre Ford, this vibrant group of musicians, with a few dancers too, created this video for the 2021 International Jazz Day in April this year, while showcasing our beautiful island of Barbados. Do enjoy the Barbados Community College Steel Ensemble performance of Wet Me. Thank you so much for joining us at this opening ceremony as we celebrate the inaugural Gender and Development Forum of the 15th session of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD 15. We look forward to sharing our panel discussions, roundtables, cross-regional dialogues, networking sessions, lightning talks, and keynote addresses over the coming days. Continue to stay safe. I am Varia Williams, and as we say in Barbados, get up good.